Hey adapters, I'm Doug Parsons. I'm a partner at Simpatico Studios where we live stream conversations about complex business and social challenges with professionals like yourself who are working on the same issues. Our shows are live streamed in front of a global audience of your professional peers on simpatico.tv. I'm building a new type of online community for professionals like yourself on the Climate Adaptation channel. If you're a regular listener of my America Adapts podcast, I think you'll find that we're taking our conversations about important problems, policies, and solutions to the next level here. And if you're interested in being a guest, we'd love to hear from you. And now join us for this latest episode. Hey Adapters, today our guest is Dr. John Mutter. John is a professor at Columbia University with 2 appointments in the Department of Earth and Environmental Sciences as a seismologist and in the School of International and Public Affairs, where he studies sustainable development. His work is a bridge between the natural and social sciences. The COVID pandemic shows us how major public health crises can have a much more harmful impact on disadvantaged communities. John will discuss possible ways that societies make climate adaptations that protect and support some communities while asking others to make inequitable sacrifices. Hi, John. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. I'm very pleased to be here.
Well, first off, I'm really looking forward to this conversation, and I think you bring up some, you know, the point of inequities within climate change. But first off, I'm checking in with guests. How are you doing with the pandemic? How's it affecting your work and everything?
Oh, well, I've been here in my one-bedroom apartment, hardly getting outside for several weeks. We're not permitted to go into the International Affairs building right now, but I believe on Monday they're going to allow some limited access. Now, what I've been doing is writing a couple of books. So here I am with my iPad, and most of my source material is on the iPad, but some of it isn't. Some of it is on the desktop of my computer in my office in SEPA that I can't get into. So I'm a little bit hampered, but it's not like I work with complex instrumentation and I can't get into the lab. I'm not, I'm not stalled too much, but yeah.
So in regards to, and I just wanted to ask a bit more on this. What's the plan for the fall, though? Or is it all going to be remote teaching in New York?
So what the university thinks is that it'll be a hybrid, that it'll be possible for some kids to be in class, but they're going to have to be 6 feet apart. And it will also have to be done remotely as well. So it'll be a mix between the two. It is what the university thinks right now. And part of that is because we think that there will be people who will not be able to get visas to get back into the US. And that's going to be particularly true for Chinese students, we think, which is a pretty large part of many of our classes.
All right, we're going to talk about inequities in climate change. And first off, to give some context there, though, is I want to get your thoughts on what's happening with adaptation right now. It's a relatively new field, and in regards to how people are approaching it, what's your sense? What's going on with adaptation to climate change in regards to creating bigger inequities? Are there opportunities to actually maybe solve some pre-existing problems? What's going on in that respect?
Yeah, so I guess the short answer is that it's very haphazard right now. And there's no systematic thinking on what you should do. And you have choices. You can, if you feel that the temperature is too warm 30 years from now, you can move. Here in the Northern Hemisphere, we just have to move towards the North Pole and not very far. And the temperature will be back to what we used to like. So, maybe everybody in New York has to move to Maine, and everybody in Maine has to move to Nova Scotia, et cetera, et cetera. So people who can move like that are typically the wealthier people, people who are mobile, people who can buy another house somewhere else. Because if you're moving from a place that's in sort of danger, you're not going to be able to sell it at any sort of reasonable price. But if you've got the capital to set up somewhere else, you will. So, in the very, very broad sense of adaptation, I think what we'll see is, in fact, I'm sure what we'll see is the habitable parts of the earth, the places where it's reasonable to live, will, in the northern hemisphere, move north and probably shrink. So that over the long term, there'll be fewer places where it's easily habitable, and they'll be in a different location. So your ability to move to those locations is very critical. And that usually goes with the wealthier people.
All right, I'm just curious, what's your impression, especially as COVID-19 is unfolding, and we have such a short time frame, but it just within even 2 or 3 months, we're seeing how it's driving inequities, or it identified the inequities in our society, and I guess we can learn from that, even though we're just starting this in regards to climate change. But what's been your observations on how we've responded to COVID-19?
Yeah, so again, it's haphazard. If you look around the world, every government's done something different, pretty much. And the authoritarian governments, like the one we happen to have right now, they tend to play it down and don't do as much as they should in the beginning, and then get with it a little bit later. And then Scandinavian countries, for instance, understand what they should do and do it. So it's being controlled moderately well in some places and not well in others. But there are, truly alarming statistics here in New York that the disparity between the Black population who've been affected by COVID-19 and the rest of us is very large. And you can make a poverty map of New York using just area codes, and it pretty much overlays right on top of a map of COVID deaths. Poorer people can't get access to good health care. They probably don't have access to good information. There are people who are playing this down. So, and the other thing about disadvantaged communities like that is that typically there's more than one generation living in a house. You've got kids, adults, and grandma. Well, if a kid gets this, transmits it to grandma, grandma's dead pretty much. But if grandma's the grandma of a wealthy white family, she's probably in a very nice assisted living situation where people would monitor and they'd know. Well, people have died in those facilities. But yeah, it's the tight living, densely packed communities like Harlem here. It's one of the most densely packed communities in all of the 5 boroughs, and it's a hotspot for COVID infections.
Well, okay, trying to find some positive of how we're responding to COVID-19. And if you think about these inequities and you look at people's access to healthcare, their ability to move, and you think about the impacts of climate change, and we're talking about managed retreat, and Columbia actually has been a leader on managed retreat.
Yep.
Can we learn from that? Can we look at the demographics? Can we look at our response or lack of response? And I guess a rational society is going to look at that as sort of a roadmap saying, well, we can do adaptation better if we can improve these areas that COVID-19 taught us. I mean, are you looking at that? Are these conversations happening?
Yeah, so there's a lot of conversation around that. And, what can we learn and what would be the wrong thing to try to learn? I mean, COVID-19, like all of these pandemics, they come and go. We could do absolutely nothing and COVID-19 would go away. It would kill a lot of people, but it'll go. That's not true for climate change. If we don't do anything, it's not going to go away. It's just going to get worse and worse, right? So they are, in some ways, fundamentally different phenomena. There's no hoped for vaccine for climate change. That's not the way you think. And climate change isn't transmitted from one person to another. So they are different. But as I said earlier, every country seems to have responded in a different way. Every country seems to have favored, intentionally or not, certain people. And the most important thing we need to do is understand that a natural disaster of any sort is something that it's a myth to say they unite people. You'd think, we're all in COVID-19 together. Well, we're not. Some people are dealing with it much better than others. And every natural disaster that ever was has separated people. It may create a sense of, well, we're all in it together for a day or two, and then the usual divisions start. And we know that a lot of this conversation started with Katrina in New Orleans, 2005. And a lot of people in the country said, oh, well, there's a lot of poor people down there. And gee, they're all in the Superdome. And where are the white people? Well, they've driven their SUVs away from New Orleans. They're holed up in a very nice hotel. They can afford it. They're not going to get compensated by FEMA. It doesn't matter to them too much. I mean, it's a bit of a pain, but it's an inconvenience more than anything else. And it's the poor people in poor neighborhoods who are immobile and can't get out. And that happened in New Orleans. There's 100,000 people still displaced from New Orleans due to Hurricane Katrina. And it's not the wealthy.
All right, so we have a community watching this right now, and I've got a question from Ken. Are there specific policies or proposed policies that you feel have the potential to do a good job of protecting poor communities? So basically a solution to some of these things that you just brought up.
Yeah, so I think there are policies already in place. We are supposed to be equitable in how we respond to a disaster or anything like this, but we're not in practice. It's illegal in this country to favor a white person against a black person in terms of healthcare, emergency response, but it still happens. So I'm not sure that legislating something is going to make much of a difference. I think we need different leaders who understand the demographics and the social disorder in the country and can direct first responders, can direct the emergency people, can direct the rebuilding. So don't just rebuild the wealthy neighborhoods. Figure out how to rebuild the lower income areas as well. And I don't want to harp on New Orleans, but the government in New Orleans was pleased that what they call the underclass, the wrong people were displaced, and they made it very difficult for particularly black people to return. It's a much smaller city now.
Have you had an opportunity to look at the international scene in regards to this? Groups, the UN and the World Bank have spent decades, and a lot of people have been kind of lifted out of poverty internationally, and climate change can reverse a lot of those trends. Do you feel like within the international negotiations, and is that an area that you kind of look into, is trying to help this? It's trying to prevent this kind of going backwards?
Yeah, they are. And they do what the UN does, which means hold conferences and listen to speeches. And I've been part of a couple of those. In their view, they would say, well, you must make people aware that this happens, that this inequality exacerbation happens. Their feeling is that not enough people even know that that's what's going on, particularly because poorer people don't have much of a voice. So they are trying to be the voice of the poorer people, which is their role. That they're supposed to try to do that. But the mechanism for enacting a more just transition, it is not understood yet.
All right, this is going to be a tough question. This is coming from the community room. And you just referred to getting better leaders in power. How can we get those from Kayla, better leaders in power? There seems to be a lot of manipulation when it comes to power retention for certain individuals. And so I guess just the faults within an existing political system. But any pathways you recommend?
Well, I can only speak for this country. And, I'm encouraged by what some of the state governors are doing. And I'm discouraged by what the federal government is doing. So I think the power to do this lies regionally and locally, not federally, in this country as it is now. It could be different, but as it is now, we've got to look to our governors to help us here. And the very liberal governors seem to know what to do, and the others, it's very common for an authoritarian leader, even if that leader is elected, to play down something like this because it makes it look like they did something wrong or the healthcare system wasn't right. So it's the same with disaster casualties. Authoritarian leaders, if there's a big hurricane or something, they'll get on public TV and say, oh, it was nothing, 20 people died, boo-hoo. Whereas in truth, 1,000 people died. But it suggests that they're not in control. And for an autocratic leader, control is everything. So those leaders are very bad for us under emergency circumstances.
I want to get you to talk maybe about some good practices. I had an opportunity to go to New York City actually, and I did a podcast around urban forestry and how that was mitigating climate change and rising temperatures. And what was really interesting is that the city there, they looked at poor neighborhoods, and a lot of these places actually had fewer trees, and they purposely were targeting these areas. And it had all these extra benefits. Well, we put more trees in, it lowers the temperature, there's better academic performance. And I thought this was an ambitious effort. Kudos to New York. Are there other scale examples of adaptation actions that are addressing inequities?
That's interesting. And don't get too excited about trees.
Okay. I like trees.
They're not going to save us. I love trees too. But the trees have a number of advantages, and just the shade and cooling down. But if they also absorb carbon dioxide, but we would have to plant trees in the ocean to plant enough trees to draw down the carbon dioxide levels we have now to something reasonable. So trees are great. There's also urban farming. Most poor communities are in food deserts, basically. You've got a few bodegas that don't sell anything very healthy. People have got to go a long way to go to somewhere where they can get nice things. I mean, the Whole Foods is one of the Whole Foods here is at Columbus Circle, 59th Street, 59th and Broadway. I mean, that's a wealthy community around there. You don't find them in poorer communities. So, but it could be encouraged. I know you put a decent grocery store selling produce and healthy things in a poor neighborhood, people will go. So long as they don't charge Whole Foods prices.
Oh, wallet. Well, and just I want to make the point that the tree planting in New York City, this wasn't trying to address the carbon emission issue or sequestration. It was solely like let's keep temperatures in an urban area, and it's an adaptation action. So to their credit, they were really thinking equity in that.
Yeah, that's very, very good. I like that work.
Okay, well, and we don't have too much time here, but you've written a book, and I want you to share it. And you cover a lot of bases there. It's a climate science book.
Yeah, I can show you.
Yes, please. Okay, now
So,
what's the book about besides climate change science?
so it's a primer. Okay, so it's if I could say it this way, if a person wants to be deeply involved in discussions about climate change, and lots of people do, it's important that they know the elements of the science that is being discussed. Not everything to do with the Earth's climate, but just the stuff that matters when you're talking about climate change. Here it is.
How thick is the book? Can you turn it sideways? All right, that's reasonable, right? Right.
And it's even a small size. It's not even a full book size.
Okay, we'll definitely have a link to that. We have a wall for your episode, so we'll have a link to the book too. And you're working on another book right now, right?
I'm working on a book that is tentatively titled "Talking Sense About Climate Change for a Change." And what I'm trying to do is navigate through the extremes. So there are people who say climate change isn't happening, or it doesn't matter if it does, or it's all natural. And at the other end, there are very good thinking people who cast this dystopian view of the future where, we're all going to fry. Neither of those views are correct. But it's very, very hard for somebody to decide which of the two is correct if they don't have at least some element of understanding of the science. And how bad could it be? How good could it be? There's a range of possibilities. So I try to be neutral. Those extreme positions often are ideological, particularly the naysayers do it on an idea. Well, the temperature can't be ideological. It's just what it is. So, making sense of the issue is what I'm trying to do.
Well, not just going back to COVID-19, we've learned the hard way. People can even ignore COVID-19 when it's right in front of their faces too. Hopefully it will learn from that kind of extreme position in regards to this is what it really means that climate change is happening and we have to respond to it.
Right. That's a very good point. Yeah.
Well, we've got to wrap this up. This has been a great conversation. I guess one last question for you is Columbia has just been a leader on climate change. The Earth Science Institute there, I've been up there and to a man's retreat conference. The journalism school. Where you're at, I feel like are the different schools talking to each other? Because I think of the brain power dedicated to climate change at Columbia. Are you guys collaborating with these other great schools? It just seems like a lot of synergy there. Is that happening?
Yeah, and there's even talk about starting a climate school, a school within Columbia dedicated to all things climate, and it would merge a lot of centers and institutes and bring them together in that sort of way. We do talk a lot to one another. The campus is sort of spread out, but we talk. We talk to the public health people. The natural scientists do talk to the social scientists, and I'm now a bit of both. I can get away with pretending I'm an economist sometimes, but the old saying that the only thing more dangerous than an economist is an amateur economist. So I try not to say too much.
What is it called? It's called the miserable science, right? Isn't that the expression?
The dismal science.
The dismal science, right? Well, yeah, okay. Columbia is great, and one of the conversations I have a lot of conversations with academics, and there very few graduate programs offer any sort of like climate change like degree or emphasis. There might be professors doing some really great work, but not a lot of coursework, and so I think there's a real demand to actually bring it all together like that. So I hope that happens.
Yeah. At a PhD level, you can get a PhD in climate science. At the undergraduate level, we started a few years ago a PhD, an undergraduate degree in sustainable development. I direct the PhD program in sustainable development, but within the sustainable development curriculum, there is, as there has to be, a good deal of interest in climate science. So you can't get through a major in sustainable development at Columbia College without learning a lot about climate change.
And I should have qualified, and I don't even mean climate science. It's just adaptation specifically. What programs are out there that you're getting like a master's in adaptation planning? Does that mean urban planning? Does that mean you're a landscape architect? And I think schools are figuring out how they fill in the need for that kind of work.
Yeah, and whether it's needed at a professional level, we have a school called the School of Professional Studies, which the students are usually people who have professions already, and they feel they need to know certain things that have come up, like adaptation. So they go back to school, usually nights and weekends, and get up to speed on important issues that are going to help them execute their jobs. We should be teaching undergraduates too, and we do need PhD people, not just in the natural sciences, but economists who think about what climate change is going to do to us. That's getting to be a big area now, and not just at Columbia.
All right, so we need to wrap this up. This has been very interesting. I appreciate you coming on, and I think we'd probably have some future conversations. We'll be in touch about that. I want you to hold on. We're going to get you into this Just Chatting where the episode's kind of officially over. But, just thanks for coming on. Thanks for the work that you're doing.
Oh, I'm always willing to talk. So I'm very pleased. Thank you for inviting me.
All right, so just hold on. I'm going to get you up and Just Chatting in a second.
Okay.